May 15, 1943. Carlsbad Army Airfield, Auxiliary Air Base, New Mexico. The brand new control tower stands silent in the morning heat. The barracks gleam with fresh paint. The fuel tanks cast long shadows across concrete that has barely cured. Generals' cars are parked in neat rows, awaiting their first mission briefing. This base has never seen combat. It has never launched a single bomber into enemy territory. But in the next 30 minutes, it will burn to the ground. Not from enemy sabotage. Not from a training accident. From something far stranger, armed bats carrying napalm, unleashed by America's own military in a desperate experiment to end the war. The creatures roost silently beneath a fuel tank, their tiny bombs ticking down. And the men who released them stand locked outside the gates, watching their entire operation prepare to ignite. This is the story of Project X-Ray. December 7, 1941. Dr. Lytle S. Adams sits behind the wheel of his car, driving through the New Mexico desert toward his home in Pennsylvania. Days earlier, he had stood in Carlsbad Caverns National Park, watching something extraordinary: over 1 million Mexican free-tailed bats emerging from the cave in a living tornado of wings and echolocation. The spectacle held him transfixed. This perfect synchronization of nature's smallest aerial mammals. The radio crackles. Pearl Harbor has been attacked. The Pacific Fleet lies in ruins. America enters the war. Adams grips the steering wheel tighter. A dental surgeon by trade, he has no military training. No weapons expertise. But he does have something else. A mind that sees connections others miss. The same mind that invented an airmail system allowing planes to pick up and drop mail without landing, a system Eleanor Roosevelt herself witnessed during a personal flight demonstration. That connection matters now because Adams knows the First Lady. Paper. Bamboo. What? Adams understands that Japanese cities are built from materials that burn. Traditional construction spans centuries, homes and factories woven from natural fibers that ignite at the touch of flame. He thinks about the bats, creatures capable of carrying loads twice their body weight, navigating through darkness with precision that defies human comprehension, seeking shelter in the hidden spaces of structures during daylight hours. An idea forms. Terrifying. Brilliant. Utterly insane. January 12, 1942. Adams sits at his desk and writes a letter to the White House. His words reflect the moral calculus of total war, calling the bat the lowest form of animal life, creatures created by God to serve this exact purpose. The letter lands on President Franklin Roosevelt's desk, accompanied by a note from aides suggesting the sender might be mentally unstable. Roosevelt reads it, then writes a memo to Colonel William J. Donovan, Director of the Office of Strategic Services. This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea but is worth looking into. The U.S. military begins studying bats as weapons of war. Adams assembles his team at Division 19 of the National Defense Research Committee, known as the Sandman Club. Jack Von Blocher, a mammalogist from the Los Angeles County Museum who calls himself a bat lover, joins without questioning the ecological or moral implications of sacrificing millions of creatures. Tim Holt, a 23-year-old actor destined for Western films, signs on. 2 high school students, Jack Kuffer and Harry Fletcher, become the youngest members. An ex-gangster named Patricio Batista, claiming to have worked for Al Capone, handles operations that require creative thinking beyond military procedure. They travel across America searching for the perfect species. 1,000 caves. 3,000 mines. Teams sleep in their cars between locations, covering 350,000 miles. They test the mastiff bat with its 20-inch wingspan, too rare. The mule-eared bat, too sensitive. Finally, they settle on the Mexican free-tailed bat, abundant, resilient, weighing just half an ounce but capable of carrying payloads up to 3 times its body weight. The logistics seem impossible. Each bat must carry a bomb small enough not to impede flight but powerful enough to ignite Japanese structures. The smallest military explosive at that time weighs 2 pounds, 4,000 times heavier than their carrier. Enter Dr. Louis Fieser, Harvard chemist and inventor of military napalm. A man whose laboratory work will later haunt civilian populations across Asia for decades. He designs the H-2 unit, a cellulose capsule no larger than a finger joint, weighing 17 grams, filled with kerosene and napalm gel. A thin steel wire separates the firing pin from the cartridge. When the wire corrodes from body heat and time, the device ignites. Attachment proves challenging. Surgical clips fail. String tangles. Eventually, the team settles on adhesive glue applied directly to the bat's chest. Tests confirm that a 14-gram bat can carry a 15 to 18-gram payload without compromising flight capability. The bomb casing itself becomes an engineering marvel. A 5-foot sheet metal tube houses 26 circular trays, each containing 40 compartments, 1,040 bats per bomb. The creatures must be kept in hibernation during transport and storage. The solution: ice cube trays. Scientists cool the bats to temperatures that induce artificial sleep states, their metabolism slowing until they resemble the dead. Operational planning reaches ambitious scale. 10 B-24 bombers flying from Alaska, each carrying 100 bat bombs. The math staggers the mind. 1,040,000 armed bats released simultaneously over Osaka Bay's industrial cities. The bats would disperse across a 20 to 40 mile radius, seeking shelter in eaves, attics, nooks, the hidden spaces where humans store their most flammable materials. Timer synchronized. 15 minutes after roosting, the napalm ignites. Phaser calculates projected damage. Standard incendiary bombs might produce 167 to 400 fires per mission. The bat bombs, 3,625 to 4,748 fires. A 12-fold increase in destructive power. The advantage lies not in explosive force but in stealth placement. Fire watchers cannot see what roosts in darkness. Householders cannot extinguish flames beginning simultaneously in 1,000 hidden locations. Adams writes enthusiastically about the potential, thousands of fires breaking out at once across a 40-mile diameter. Japan devastated with minimal loss of life compared to conventional bombing, a claim that conveniently ignores the nature of urban firestorms. The Army Air Force takes command. Code name: the Adams Plan. Later, the Navy renames it Project X-Ray when they assume control in August 1943. The Marines inherit the operation that December, moving all testing to El Centro, California. $2 million flows into the project, equivalent to $34.9 million today. Laboratories work around the clock. Biologists study bat behavior. Engineers design release mechanisms. Chemists perfect incendiary formulas. The weapon moves toward operational readiness. But first they need to test it. May 1943. Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base. A facility so new its paint has not fully dried. The perfect location for a demonstration that will prove the bat bomb's effectiveness. Or destroy everything in spectacular fashion. The testing grounds at Muroc Lake, California, April 1943. 6,000 bats wait in refrigerated containers, their tiny bodies cooled into hibernation. The first test uses dummy bombs, inert devices that mimic weight and aerodynamics without the lethal payload. A B-25 bomber circles at altitude. The bomb bay opens. The first canister drops. The parachute deploys at 4,000 feet as designed. The metal casing begins its descent, slowing, falling toward the predetermined altitude where the trays should separate and release their cargo. 1,000 feet. The sides open. Circular trays slide free on their connecting cables. Nothing happens. The bats remain frozen. Too cold. The temperature differential between high altitude and ground level insufficient to wake them from induced hibernation. They plummet like stones, still locked in their artificial sleep, striking the desert floor with dull impacts that shatter small bodies against unforgiving earth. Engineers recalculate. The next batch receives less cooling time. Launch altitude increases to 5,000 feet, giving the bats more time to warm during descent. The bomber makes another pass. This time the bats wake. But coordination collapses immediately. Some creatures orient toward the horizon, flying directly away from the test range into the desert sunset. Others circle aimlessly, disoriented by the trauma of artificial cooling and aerial deployment. A few managed to roost but not on the mock-up structures built to simulate Japanese buildings. They scatter across 40 miles of California wasteland, dummy bombs dangling from chest adhesives, vanishing into geography too vast to search. The team returns to New Mexico, to Carlsbad, the caves that inspired this entire mad venture. They need more bats. Thousands more. The National Park Service grants permission for Dr. Von Blocher to harvest creatures from government property, though such an operation would be considered ecological catastrophe today. Net span cave mouse. Collectors work through the night, capturing the emerging streams of Mexican free-tailed bats as they exit to hunt insects. The bats are processed like military equipment. Weighed. Sorted by size and health. The strongest specimens are selected. The ones whose wing membranes show no tears, whose bodies carry sufficient fat reserves, whose reflexes respond sharply to handling. They are loaded into ice cube trays by the hundreds, cooled slowly to prevent shock, their metabolisms throttling down until respirations become barely detectable. Jack Kuffer, one of the high school assistants, watches the process with growing unease. He loves bats. Studied them as a teenager. Raised injured specimens in his home, learning their habits and temperaments. Now he participates in their systematic weaponization. The cognitive dissonance haunts him, but patriotic duty overrides moral hesitation. Everyone on the team faces this calculus. Von Blocher, the self-proclaimed bat lover, never questions whether ecological consequences matter when national survival appears at stake. By May 1943, the team achieves technical refinement. The H-2 units attach cleanly with improved adhesive formulas. The bomb casings deploy their parachutes with mechanical reliability. The trays separate at the correct altitude, releasing bats that wake gradually, naturally as warming air penetrates their artificial dormancy. Tests at El Centro demonstrate that the creatures will indeed seek shelter in structures, roosting in exactly the locations where napalm would cause maximum damage. But live explosives have not yet been used in field conditions. The dummy bombs prove concept. The inert tests demonstrate delivery systems. Now comes the moment when theory transforms into destructive reality. Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base emerges from desert dust in early 1943. Construction crews pour concrete runways. Carpenters frame barracks. Electricians wire the control tower. Plumbers install fuel systems beneath ground and above, massive tanks that will supply bombers preparing for Pacific deployments. The base represents millions in investment, strategic positioning for operations that will project American air power across ocean distances into the heart of enemy territory. And it has never housed a single operational aircraft. Perfect for a weapons test. Isolated. Expendable if something goes wrong. The Bat Bomb team arrives with their refrigerated cargo. Army Air Corps photographers accompany them. Signal Corps personnel tasked with documenting this experimental program for military records and potential training materials. May 15, 1943. Morning heat builds across the New Mexico desert. The plan calls for a simple demonstration. Armed bats will be deployed from a bomber at altitude. The creatures will roost on designated structures within the test range. The napalm devices will ignite on schedule. Photographers will capture the sequence for analysis. Command officials will observe from a safe distance and evaluate combat readiness. But the execution begins to collapse before the bomber even takes off. Strong winds blow across the airfield, unexpected gusts that scatter the test parameters. The B-25 releases its canister. The parachute deploys correctly. The trays open. Bats wake, disoriented by wind shear, and disperse beyond the designated test zone. Photographers track their flight paths through camera viewfinders, but the subjects move too far, too fast. Within minutes, the bats vanish beyond the airfield perimeter. No footage. No data. The test fails to produce any usable documentation. Signal Corps officers approach the project team with a request. Stage another deployment for the cameras. This time keep the bats closer. Control the variables. Use live incendiary devices, the real H-2 units, so the footage demonstrates actual operational capability rather than theoretical concepts. The team agrees. They prepare another batch of bats, removing them from refrigerated storage, attaching H2 units loaded with live napalm charges. The devices are armed, timers set to ignite 15 minutes after deployment, enough time for the bats to roost but not enough to allow for recapture if something goes wrong. The photographers arrange their equipment. Officers position themselves for optimal viewing angles. The team handles the bats carefully, keeping them cool enough to remain docile but not so cold they will fail to wake when needed. Then the New Mexico sun does what it always does. Heat radiates from concrete runways. Temperature climbs rapidly toward midday peaks. The bats warm faster than anticipated, their bodies responding to environmental conditions that simulate the timing of natural awakening cycles. They wake up early, while still being handled, while still on the ground, while the 50-minute timers tick down inside the napalm devices glued to their chests. 6 bats escape. Just 6. Out of hundreds prepared for the staged demonstration. They launch from handling stations, wings beating with the desperate energy of creatures fleeing perceived danger. The handlers lunge, trying to recapture them, but the bat's echolocation navigates between grasping hands with biological precision that evolved across millions of years. The creatures fly toward what all bats seek when exposed to daylight: darkness, shelter, enclosed spaces that offer protection from predators and sun exposure. They find the control tower, shadows beneath its stairs and equipment housings. They find the barracks, gaps beneath doorways and crawl spaces under newly constructed flooring. They find the fuel tanks, cool metal shade that shields them from desert heat. And they roost. Exactly as the weapon was designed to make them do. In the hidden spaces of military infrastructure. In locations where humans cannot easily reach. In places where fire will spread fastest. The timers continue their countdown. 15 minutes. Now 12. Now 8. Base commander stands at the auxiliary field gates, demanding entry. The Bat Bomb team refuses. Security classification prevents him from accessing the test zone. He watches through chain-link fencing as smoke begins to curl from his control tower. From his barracks. From beneath his fuel tanks. Project X-ray works perfectly. Just not on the intended target. The first flames appear at 1014 hours local time. Smoke rises from beneath the fuel storage tank where 3 of the escaped bats found shelter in the shadowed space between metal base and concrete foundation. The napalm ignites according to specification. Gel adhering to surfaces, burning with intense heat that exceeds gasoline fires by several hundred degrees. The bats die instantly, incinerated in the chemical reaction their bodies carried into this enclosed space. But the fire doesn't stop with the bats. The napalm was designed to spread, to cling, to transform small ignition sources into sustained conflagrations. It runs along the underside of the tank, following welded seams and support structures. Metal heats. Rivets expand. The fuel inside the tank, aviation gasoline stored for bombers that will never use it, begins to warm. Personnel inside the auxiliary base notice the smoke. They shout warnings. Men scramble toward fire suppression equipment, moving with the trained urgency of military drills performed countless times. But the security classification locks them in just as effectively as it locked the base commander out. The Bat Bomb team controls gate access. Classified operations cannot be observed by unauthorized personnel, even when those personnel own the facility currently burning. Outside the fence, the commander's rage escalates from professional anger to something more primal. His base, his responsibility, his command, his career, burns while civilians with clipboards refuse him entry. He demands explanations. Receives classified silence. Threatens consequences. Encounters bureaucratic barriers that make physical fences seem negotiable by comparison. Inside, the control tower ignites. 2 bats had roost in the stairwell, wedging themselves into the gap between steps and wall support. The H2 units detonated simultaneously, napalm splashing across wooden construction that passed fire code inspections just weeks earlier. Modern materials, properly treated, should resist casual ignition. But napalm doesn't produce casual ignition. It produces sustained chemical combustion that overwhelms fire retardant treatments through sheer thermal intensity. Flames climb the interior stairs. Smoke fills the observation deck where air traffic controllers would have directed bomber formations toward Pacific targets. Glass cracks from heat stress. Paint blisters and peels, releasing toxic fumes that add chemical hazard to thermal danger. The radio equipment, state-of-the-art communication systems linking this base to command structures across the continental United States, melts into expensive slag. The barracks ignite next. One bat had found sanctuary in the crawl space beneath newly constructed sleeping quarters. These buildings house no personnel yet. The base remains in final preparation stages before receiving its assigned units. But they contain everything soldiers need: bunks, lockers, personal storage, administrative spaces. The napalm spreads across wooden floor joists, following the architecture of support beams and load-bearing structures. The fire travels laterally, horizontally, finding oxygen-rich pathways through ventilation gaps and foundation openings. Construction workers watch their labor burn. Weeks of carpentry, plumbing, electrical work, all reduced to fuel for a fire that should never have started. Some try to fight it with portable extinguishers, spraying chemical retardant at flames that laugh at such inadequate responses. Napalm burns underwater. A few gallons of foam mean nothing. The photographer's camera captures everything. The official Army Air Corps record of Project X-Ray's first catastrophic failure. Later, Jack Kuffer will describe these moments with dark humor, recognizing the terrible irony that the weapon worked exactly as designed. The bats roost in hidden spaces. The timers function precisely. The napalm ignited with devastating effectiveness. If this were Tokyo instead of New Mexico, if these were Japanese factories instead of American military facilities, the test would be declared an unqualified success. Fire Marshal George S. Young races between burning structures, assessing damage, calculating response requirements. His training prepared him for accidents, electrical fires, fuel spills, ordnance mishaps. But nothing in his experience covers this scenario: enemy weapon tactics deployed against friendly infrastructure by the nation developing the weapon. He files his report later that day, carefully professional language masking the surreal nature of events. Fire caused by explosion of incendiary bomb materials. Estimated damage: $6,838, roughly $110,000 in 2024 dollars. A significant loss, but not catastrophic in the scale of wartime military expenditures. The real cost lies elsewhere, in questions that cannot be easily calculated. If 6 bats cause this much destruction against concrete and steel, what happens when 1,040,000 bats deploy against paper and wood? The base commander finally gains entry after the security team acknowledges that operational secrecy matters less than preventing the entire facility from burning to the ground. He surveys the damage with the expression of a man watching his career prospects evaporate alongside the rising smoke. He listens to explanations that sound like absurdist fiction. Bats. Napalm. Secret weapons project. Presidential authorization. Then comes the strangest order of his military service: provide a bulldozer to bury the evidence. Don't ask questions. Don't document details. Don't discuss what happened with anyone lacking proper clearance. Just cover it up. Literally. Push the charred debris into trenches and fill them with New Mexico dirt. The bat bomb team evacuates quickly, loading surviving equipment and refrigerated bats onto transport vehicles before local command can begin asking detailed questions. They leave behind the bulldozers grinding through ruins, erasing physical traces of an experiment that proved both visionary and disastrous in the same morning. Adams maintains his enthusiasm despite the catastrophe. In his mind, the test validated core concepts. The delivery system worked. The bats behaved predictably. The napalm performed beyond specifications. If American facilities suffered this level of damage from accidental release, imagine the devastation against enemy cities where millions of bats deploy simultaneously, where fire suppression systems are already stressed by conventional bombing campaigns, where population density concentrates flammable materials into target-rich environments. But the military leadership sees different implications. Operational security matters. Weapons must be controllable. If a test on American soil produces this level of chaos, what happens in combat conditions where variables multiply exponentially? Weather changes, enemy defenses, navigation errors. The margin between precise deployment and friendly fire catastrophe seems impossibly narrow. The project transfers to the Navy in August 1943. The official reason: broader resources, better facilities, enhanced coordination with Pacific operations. The unofficial reason: getting the Bat bomb away from the Army Air Corps after it burned down one of their bases. The Navy renames it Project X-ray, a designation that suggests penetrating vision, seeing through obstacles, revealing hidden vulnerabilities. A more sophisticated name than Adams' plan, reflecting institutional ownership rather than individual inventors' vision. The Marines inherit the program in December 1943, moving operations to El Centro, California. Marine Corps culture embraces unconventional warfare. They see potential where others see madness. They appreciate weapons that circumvent traditional defenses, that operate in the margins between conventional military doctrine and creative destruction. They believe the Bat bomb can work. Not despite the Carlsbad disaster, but because of it. If 6 bats can incinerate a military base, imagine what 1 million could achieve against cities where citizens sleep in wooden houses beneath paper roofs, where factories store flammable materials in bamboo warehouses, where fire departments lack equipment to fight simultaneous ignitions across 40 square miles. But time is running out. The war advances. Other secret projects compete for resources. And somewhere in the New Mexico desert, a different team works on something called atomic fission. Dugway Proving Ground, Utah. Summer 1943. The Japanese village sits in the desert, an elaborate mock-up constructed by the Chemical Warfare Service to test incendiary weapons against authentic target architecture. Not a Hollywood set. A genuine reconstruction built to exact specifications. Traditional Japanese residential structures with wooden frames, bamboo supports, paper walls, tatami mat floors. The materials were sourced carefully, imported or recreated to match density, moisture content and flammability of actual Japanese construction. The village includes multiple building types. Family homes with characteristic sliding doors and internal courtyard spaces. Commercial structures with storage areas and shop fronts. Even the furniture is authentic. Low tables, sleeping mats, the everyday items that fill civilian life. The Chemical Warfare Service spared no detail in this simulation. They wanted to know precisely how Japanese cities would burn. Project X-ray arrives for its definitive test. The Marines have refined procedures over months of experimentation at El Centro. They understand bat behavior now, the temperature gradients needed for controlled hibernation and awakening, the altitude requirements for successful deployment, the timing sequences that allow creatures to roost before napalm ignites. They've corrected the mistakes that burned Carlsbad. They've learned from the scattered failures at Muroc Lake. They're ready to prove this weapon can work as designed. The test begins at dawn, the optimal time when bats naturally seek shelter after nocturnal hunting. The B-25 bomber circles at 5,000 feet. In its bay, the bomb casing holds 1,040 Mexican free-tailed bats, each carrying a 17-gram H2 unit glued to its chest. The creatures sleep in their cooled compartments, metabolism slowed, wings folded, unaware they're about to participate in military history. The release happens at 0545 hours. The casing drops clean from the bomb bay, falling through morning air that gradually warms as altitude decreases. At 4,000 feet, the parachute deploys, a white canopy blooming against dawn sky. The descent slows. Inside the casing, temperature rises. The bats begin to stir. At 1,000 feet, the trays separate. Metal sides fall away. Circular compartments break free on their connecting cables, suspended beneath the parachute like beads on a string. The bats wake fully now, warm air triggering neural responses that signal daylight exposure and the need to find shelter immediately. They disperse. 1,040 winged shapes scattering across the proving ground in patterns that follow biological imperative refined across evolutionary time. They're not following orders. They're not executing tactical maneuvers. They're simply doing what all bats do when dawn catches them away from roosting sites. Find darkness, find enclosure, find safety. The Japanese village offers exactly what they need. Eaves that overhang wooden walls. Attics accessible through ventilation gaps. Storage spaces beneath floors where support joists create shadowed sanctuaries. The bats flood into these spaces with the efficiency of water finding cracks in stone. They roost quickly, naturally, in the precise locations where fire will cause maximum structural damage. 15 minutes pass. Observers watch through binoculars from command positions a safe distance away. They see nothing unusual. No movement, no smoke, no indication that beneath the village's exterior, chemical timers are completing their cycles inside 1,000 tiny bombs. Then the napalm ignites. Not simultaneously. The timers vary slightly, individual differences in temperature and chemical corrosion creating a cascade effect rather than single detonation. But close enough. Fire blooms in dozens of locations within seconds. Hidden flames in spaces where human firefighters would never look until too late. The Japanese village burns with an intensity that shocks even the observers who designed this test. The paper walls ignite instantly, flash combustion that transforms vertical surfaces into sheets of flame. The bamboo supports crack and splinter, structural integrity failing as heat destroys molecular bonds. The wooden frames burn with the sustained intensity of seasoned timber, providing fuel that maintains combustion long after initial ignition. But it's the hidden fires that prove most devastating. Flames beginning in attics spread laterally beneath roofs, invisible to ground observation until entire structures collapse. Fires starting beneath floors travel through crawl spaces, following air currents and architectural features that channel heat toward new fuel sources. The bats chose their roosts with survival instinct, not tactical consideration, yet their choices create fire patterns more effective than any bombardier could achieve. The chief of incendiary testing watches his mock-up village transform into an inferno that validates his worst predictions and greatest hopes simultaneously. He documents observations with professional detachment. A reasonable number of destructive fires can be started in spite of the extremely small size of the units. The main advantage of the units would seem to be their placement within the enemy structures without the knowledge of the householder or fire watchers, thus allowing the fire to establish itself before being discovered. The National Defense Research Committee observer produces calculations that stagger military planners. A single B-24 bomber carrying conventional incendiary bombs might start 167 to 400 fires per mission. The same bomber loaded with bat bombs, 3,625 to 4,748 fires. The weight efficiency makes traditional ordnance look primitive by comparison. The chief chemist's report uses measured language to describe revolutionary capability. Expressed in another way, the regular bombs would give probably 167 to 400 fires per bomb load, where X-ray would give 3,625 to 4,748 fires. The test concludes with the Japanese village reduced to ash and charred timber. Structural collapse is total. If this were Tokyo, if this were Osaka, if this were any of the wooden cities that house Japanese civilian populations and industrial infrastructure, the devastation would be catastrophic. The bat bomb works. Not theoretically. Not conceptually. Actually, measurably, devastatingly works. The Marines schedule further testing for mid-1944, working toward operational deployment by 1945. They believe this weapon could end the war, not through explosive force but through fire spreading too fast to control, igniting simultaneously across geographic areas too vast to defend. Adams' original vision seems vindicated. 10 B-24 bombers from Alaska, each releasing 100,000 armed bats over Osaka Bay's industrial centers. Millions of fires beginning at once. Japan's cities burning while its population flees into countryside that cannot support urban refugees. Then Admiral Ernest J. King receives a classified briefing. He reads the test results, examines the timeline, considers the operational requirements. Combat readiness by mid-1945 at earliest. Another year of development. Additional millions in funding. Meanwhile, Other reports cross his desk. Different projects. Different approaches to ending the war. He asks about something coded under a different classification. Scientists in New Mexico working on atomic research. Theoretical physics transforming into practical weapons. A single bomb that could destroy an entire city without requiring millions of bats, without depending on biological variables, without the operational complexity of aerial wildlife deployment. King cancels Project X-ray in August 1944. The official reason: extended development timeline preventing combat readiness before war's anticipated conclusion. The unofficial reason: atomic physics has overtaken biological warfare in the race to create weapons powerful enough to force unconditional surrender. Years later, Jack Kuffer, no longer a high school assistant but a filmmaker documenting nature rather than weaponizing it, reflects on the project with dark irony. There was no point in fiddling with bats when they had something like the atomic bomb. But in 1944, nobody yet knows what atomic bombs will do to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nobody understands radiation poisoning or nuclear fallout or the geopolitical implications of weapons that make conventional warfare obsolete. They only know that Project X-ray cost $2 million, burned down an American air base, and proved that nature could be transformed into incendiary warfare more effective than anything human engineers had previously created. The bats return to their caves. The napalm formula goes into mass production. And Los Alamos continues its work in secret. March 1945. American B-29 bombers begin firebombing raids against Japanese cities. Not with bats. With conventional incendiary clusters. M47 bombs and M69 incendiary devices that rain from the sky in precise patterns, igniting urban centers with calculated devastation. Tokyo burns. Osaka burns. Kobe, Nagoya, Yokohama. One city after another transforms into firestorms that kill tens of thousands in single nights. The wooden cities that Project X-ray was designed to destroy are destroyed anyway, through methods that require no biological weaponization, no complex delivery systems, no unpredictable animal behavior. The bat bomb's cancellation proves irrelevant to Japan's fate. The fires come regardless. The question was never whether Japanese cities would burn but simply which American weapon would light them. Louis Fieser's napalm, the chemical compound he designed for the H-2 units, enters mass production. Dow Chemical manufactures it by the ton. The formula perfected on bat-carried microbombs now fills massive incendiary devices that B-29s drop by the hundreds per mission. Years later, during Vietnam, napalm becomes synonymous with controversial warfare, images of burning civilians generating protests that span continents. Fieser expresses no regret for its invention, maintaining that scientists bear no moral responsibility for how governments deploy their creations. August 6 and 9, 1945. Atomic bombs detonate over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war ends. Project X-ray becomes a classified footnote, its records buried in military archives alongside other experimental programs that never achieved operational deployment. But the project's legacy extends beyond its cancellation. The Dugway Proving Ground tests demonstrated principles that military planners couldn't ignore. Distributed ignition sources prove more devastating than concentrated explosives. Biological delivery systems can circumvent traditional defenses, and nature's patterns, when properly understood and weaponized, create tactical advantages beyond conventional military doctrine. Dr. Lytle Adams returns to his dental practice. He maintains until his death in 1970 that the bat bomb would have been more humane than atomic weapons, his moral calculus measuring destruction by civilian casualties rather than total devastation. Think of thousands of fires breaking out simultaneously over a circle of 40 miles in diameter for every bomb dropped, he wrote later. Japan could have been devastated, yet with small loss of life. The statement reveals both vision and blindness, recognizing that distributed fires might spare more civilians than nuclear annihilation while ignoring that fire killed tens of thousands during conventional firebombing campaigns. The bat bomb's projected small loss of life depended on assumptions about evacuation rates, fire suppression capabilities, and population responses that urban firestorms repeatedly proved wrong. Jack Kuffer pursues filmmaking after the war, directing nature documentaries that celebrate rather than weaponize wildlife. His book, Bat Bomb, World War II's Other Secret Weapon, provides one of the few detailed accounts of Project X-ray's development. He describes the cognitive dissonance of loving bats while participating in their systematic deployment as incendiary weapons, the patriotic fervor that overrode ecological concerns, the team's genuine belief they were shortening the war and saving lives through biological warfare. Von Blocher, the mammalogist who called himself a bat lover while harvesting millions of creatures from government caves, never publicly discusses whether he questioned Project X-ray's morality. His scientific papers continue focusing on bat behavior and conservation, the years spent gluing napalm to tiny chests becoming professional history too classified to mention and perhaps too uncomfortable to examine. The Mexican free-tailed bats of Carlsbad caverns continue their nightly migrations, oblivious to their brief military service. The caves remain protected by the National Park Service, though regulations now forbid the kind of mass harvesting that supplied Project X-ray. Conservation biology emerged partly from recognition that even abundant species can be threatened by exploitation. Lessons learned too late for the estimated millions of bats that died in testing and development. The Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base rebuilds. The burned structures are replaced. The fuel tanks reinstalled. The control tower rises from desert foundations again. Base personnel receive no explanation about the fire beyond official reports attributing it to explosion of incendiary bomb materials. Rumors circulate, stories about escaped bats and secret weapons testing, but classified protocols prevent confirmation. Eventually the base closes, its strategic value diminished by changing military requirements. Today, only historical markers hint at its role in one of World War II's strangest weapons programs. The Chemical Warfare Service's Japanese village at Dugway Proving Ground serves its purpose multiple times over, providing data that informs conventional firebombing campaigns. The mock-up structures burn and are rebuilt, each iteration teaching American strategists how to maximize fire damage against traditional Japanese architecture. The knowledge gained from bat bomb tests applies directly to conventional operations. The $2 million spent on Project X-ray, roughly $34.9 million today, produces no operational weapons but generates invaluable data about incendiary warfare. Fieser's napalm formula. Understanding of distributed ignition patterns. Recognition that small, precisely placed fires overwhelm fire suppression systems better than large explosions. The tactical concepts survive even though the delivery mechanism doesn't. In military archives, Project X-ray's files remain partially classified decades after the war's end. Some technical details about the H-2 units, some operational planning documents, some test results, all still restricted. Not because the bat bomb threatens modern security but because admission of such programs raises uncomfortable questions about the boundaries between scientific innovation and ethical responsibility.